Hi, my name is Robert Chelle with Chelle Law, and I'm an attorney that assists nurse practitioners with employment contract and independent contractor agreement issues. Today I'm going to talk about the differences between a W-2 versus a 1099 for nurse practitioners. So what are the main differences between the two, and then some red flag areas that you need to keep in mind. So first, a W-2 is simply you're classified as an employee. At the end of the year, you'll receive a W-2 from the employer. Taxes will be taken out of any compensation that you receive. Usually you'll get benefits, health, vision, dental, disability, life, retirement. They'll usually kick in for your licensing, DEA registration, continuing education, provide your malpractice insurance, that type of thing. So as an employee, basically you can think of it as you're going to get benefits, or at least you should, and they're going to take taxes out of your compensation. As an independent contractor, no taxes are taken out of any compensation you receive from the practice. So you'll have to account for those, either quarterly or at the end of the year. They're not going to pay benefits. Maybe they'll cover your premium for your malpractice policy, but that's about it. You're not going to get anything else. So in what situation does, one versus the other make sense? Well, if you're working full-time for an employer, meaning 5 days a week, 9 to 5, it's very unlikely that you are an independent contractor. If they're dictating the days you work, the hours you work, the patients you see, all that kind of thing, very likely you are an employee, not an independent contractor. I find some practices will dictate to the NP, this is what you are going to be classified as. You don't have a choice. And many places will do that simply to get out of having to pay employment tax. Employment tax does vary from state to state, but usually somewhere between 8 to 12% is how much they would have to pay. And so some places just prefer not to pay that, so they misclassify some of their nurse practitioners as independent contractors when they aren't. So what are risks associated with misclassification? Well, the IRS could come in and do an audit and determine that you are not an independent contractor, and that you are an employee, and therefore there could be back taxes, penalties, fines. Any of that can be associated with misclassification. The state can do that as well. And so you want to make absolutely certain there's no language in your contract that states you are solely responsible for any kind of misclassification, fees, costs, penalties, back taxes, any of that. When you're not the one dictating what type of, how you're classified, it is not fair that you are the one that has to take all of the liability if there is some kind of misclassification. So be very careful you don't have language in your contract that makes you solely responsible. In fact, it would be better if it was the opposite. If the practice is dictating what you are, then they should be the one that takes the responsibility if there is some kind of misclassification issue. All right, so as an independent contractor, if you're working part-time, so maybe once a week, a couple times a month, maybe you're doing like PRN work at a bunch of different practices simultaneously, you're not exclusive to one of them, you don't have a restrictive covenant in your independent contractor agreement, like those scenarios would make sense where you'd be an independent contractor. Whereas I said before, if you're working a full-time job somewhere, it's very unlikely that you are an actual independent contractor in practice. Now, some things to think about if you are an independent contractor: probably makes sense to create an LLC, get a tax ID number, create a bank account. And maybe if it's not so much for tax reasons, you can deduct, license, DEA registration, malpractice insurance, continuing education, all that kind of stuff. But just creating it all into one entity, I find, is usually easier for accounting purposes. So all of your comp would go into this one account, and then you can, get a credit card or whatever you want, and then pay for all of your expenses via that. It's much easier to kind of, at the end of the year, account for those things versus just taking it all of your personal account and trying to track it. So those are kind of the main differences between a W-2 versus 1099 for a nurse practitioner. If you have any questions about your employment contract or independent contractor agreement, feel free to contact my law firm at the information listed below in the description. And I appreciate you watching the video. All right, thanks. Take care.